Welcome to this episode of the Greater Phoenix Chambers podcast, Let's Talk Business Phoenix, with your host, me, Todd Sanders, President and CEO of the Greater Phoenix Chamber. In each episode, we're going to tackle important issues and subjects affecting businesses, our community, and the state today. Through relevant, timely topics, this podcast serves as the business community's voice with a mission of championing business growth, identifying problems that restrict economic development, and convening community leaders to move Phoenix forward. Well, welcome back to the podcast. Today, we're honored to have Susan Anable, who's the VP of Government and Public Affairs at Cox Communications, also a member of our board and the chair of our Public Affairs Committee. Susan, welcome.
Thank you, Todd. Thanks for having me. I'm honored to be here.
It's awesome to be here, and we've been friends for a long time. But I'd like for people to maybe get to know you a little bit better. That maybe have seen you on the stage or read your bio. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and then maybe something that's not on your bio.
Oh, okay, great. Well, I've been in Arizona for 33 years. I consider myself a native of sorts. And those of you who've been around for a while, you know, you get native status after about 5 years. But just have really enjoyed the opportunities I've had here in Arizona. Graduate from ASU, and had the good fortune to spend the first 10 years of my career working in the legislature, which is where we met. Absolutely. And got to work together. And for the past now 20 plus years, I've been with Cox Communications here in the Valley. And really can't say enough about all the great opportunities that have been afforded to me living in Phoenix, Arizona. It really is terrific.
It is. And came from Wyoming.
That's right. That's right.
Tell us a little bit, something about yourself that we wouldn't find on your bio.
Wow. Okay. Well, my go-to is a summer job during college. Worked for a natural gas company and was certified to operate a bucket truck.
There you go. See?
Yeah.
I love that.
Skills that might come in handy someday. I mean, who knows if I need to re-career, right?
Absolutely. You never know, right? When you're going to need to be able to operate a bucket truck.
Exactly.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, obviously you in your day job do a lot in the policy realm, and certainly you help lead the Chamber's policy work. Just had an election. So break it down for us. You know, there certainly were a lot of predictions before the election. There was the talk about the red wave nationally and in Arizona. What happened?
Yeah, you know, I think everybody's got their, Monday morning quarterbacking on how the elections went. But I think my take on it, Todd, is that I think the voters of Arizona ultimately said the things that are important to us may not be the things that are important to the fringe ends of the parties. And I think that's really my takeaway from what happened with the election is we ended up with some results that seem to indicate that that's kind of where the majority of people sit. I will say, and I know you've been around politics for a long time here in Arizona too, that sometimes the best policy comes from when you don't have one party controlling both houses and the governor's office. As much as, you'd like to think there's alignment and there's consistency in policy, sometimes the best needs of the state are met when there's give and take, and there's the horse trading that has to go on down at 1700 West Washington to get policy done. So that said, I'm cautiously optimistic. We'll see. We'll see. I actually feel a little better about it now than I did before the election, when there was so much uncertainty.
Agreed. And I like your point about government when you have a split. We were there obviously when Governor Napolitano was there, and you saw that they had to compromise, and we compromise in our daily lives, in our families, and that's what normal people do, and you do get good policy outcomes when you have to do that.
Yes. And I think that's going to be good for the state of Arizona ultimately. I sure hope so. I think we're all crossing our fingers and toes and anything else we can.
You bet. So obviously we have a new governor, Governor-elect Hobbs. What advice would you have for the governor? Clearly she's a product of the legislature and also Secretary of State, but what were some advice you'd have for the governor?
I think what I would say to Governor Hobbs is you don't have to boil the ocean. There are some things that are working incredibly well right now in Arizona. And so for all of the advice she's going to be given and all the people who think she needs to address this issue and take on that issue, and you need to clean house in this agency and, make all these changes, I think taking a moment to reflect on what's going well in her state, that she's going to be responsible for on the administrative side. I'll give you an example. The Arizona Commerce Authority, stable, nonpartisan, getting it done, making things happen for the state. let them keep working. I know it's a different construct for the way that office is set up, but when you've got agencies that are doing their jobs well and they are not in the middle of political issues, take on the things that you need to take on, but don't feel like you have to do everything.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, you look at some of the successes we've seen in the past just a few years. Yesterday we had TSMC's opening, and that's a huge deal for Arizona, and certainly Sandra Watson and her team have done incredible work there.
And again, Todd, you saw Democrats and Republicans standing side by side celebrating that victory. That's something that everybody in Arizona should be able to get behind and celebrate, regardless of what side of the political aisle you sit on.
I couldn't agree more. And is thinking about next year, one of the things that I think is sort of carried over, and it's been talked a lot about out there, is the expenditure limit for education. Can you maybe frame that issue a little bit and why we need to address it or why not?
Yeah, I think it's one of those, maybe a little bit of a bitter irony in the way that policy making goes and legislation goes. Is even when you think you've got the legislature and the governor in alignment around solving for the problem, and in this case it was the expenditure limits that the schools are dealing with, there's always devil in the details. And the reality is now we've got a situation where the schools are authorized to spend the funds, but there's this little minutia that happens in the authorization side of it that has to be fixed. And I don't know that anybody doesn't think it should be. I think to a person, we said we were going to do this. This is what needs to happen, and to keep the education community and teachers and parents up in the air about this is rather unfortunate. That said, it's politics, and you can understand it's such an important issue, and it's often those really important issues that get leveraged. And it's hard not to believe that isn't happening in all of this, and that's just the nature of politics.
Horse trading.
I think it's going to get done, Todd. I think it's just it's the posturing, it's the leveraging, it's all the stuff that most of the public doesn't understand or finds incredibly distasteful about the process, but there it is.
Well, and I think also the misunderstanding that this is new spending.
Right. Exactly.
This has been authorized by the legislature already, but now it's permission.
Yes. We said you can spend it, but wait, we haven't really said you can spend it yet. Yeah.
So a prediction is that either in special session or next session, this is something that's going to get resolved.
Yeah, I have to believe it does. I just think there's letting people kind of flounder with that uncertainty, even if the detractors don't like it, the matter's been settled, by and large.
So speaking of next session, what are some of the issues out there that you think we need to be focused on as a business community down at the Capitol?
Yeah. I think obviously education will continue to be an issue, and that really translates to workforce development for the chamber and for businesses. I think as parents, we all want to see our kids get educated. We'd like to see our kids have jobs and stay in the state. So that's a piece of it. But as businesses, we need employees, and it's darn hard to find them right now. It's still hard. And I don't think that's going to change overnight. But so I think education tied to workforce, that'll be a big issue. Water's going to be a critically huge issue. It always is, but probably, even now more than ever, given the current status of the Colorado River. And, so that's something that shouldn't be a partisan issue. It typically becomes an urban versus rural issue. So I think that's kind of where you see the fighting and the bunkers people go into about water issues for sure. And I think, obviously the border and immigration are always going to be issues. I'm very hopeful that maybe Congress might be able to get that issue under control, at least in the way that matters to the state right now. The more they can get into the legislation that Senator Sinema is working on right now, the better, as far as getting certainty and, hopefully taking away the current situation we have with people coming across the border without certainty, but with ultimate desperation.
We heard this morning that the state revenues are coming in way ahead of budget. Another year. I think when you and I were there was no such thing really as a surplus, which can make things harder. Any thoughts on the spending that might or may not occur?
Yeah, I think with the very close split between the House and the Senate and a Democrat sitting in the governor's office this year, I think there'll be some greater pressure to take some of that favorability and solve for some of the problems. And everybody's got their lists. These are the things that are the priorities. And Democrats and Republicans alike, right? While I'm sure many of the Republicans will say spending is the domain of the Democrats, but the reality is that everybody's got their priorities. So I think there'll be a lot of gnashing of teeth over how to spend those dollars. I think what we've learned through now two sort of very interesting, very different, you can call them recessions, whatever we want to call them, economic disruption that we've faced in Arizona in the last 15 years, is that planning for the future makes sense. So I think you're going to see some of the more conservative Republicans saying, okay, the sun's shining right now, but we know, bring the rainy day fund up again. But that idea about, making sure that the state is not committing to long-term year-over-year expenditures. And so, hopefully that means that the legislature will focus on some of the things that need critical attention, one-time expenditures. We'll see.
Absolutely. And I think you talked a little bit about this a minute ago. You talked about how people kind of their eyes glaze over when you start talking about this. But clearly this has impacts on all of us. What happens at the Capitol can have direct impacts on all of us. Why should the business community care what's happening down at 1700? Why should they be involved?
Yeah, no, this is a great question. And I think this is the reason why we have chambers of commerce and why they have the important role that they do, which is to say that everything that the legislature does, even if it isn't directly and specifically tied to a business issue, quote unquote, has tangential impacts, and it has indirect impacts on what we do as a business community. From having a good education system in Arizona so that we can attract quality workers who will be willing to come and live here because they know their kids will have a good education system, to making sure that there's adequate housing so that, as the TSMCs that come online and other employers know that their employees will have housing. So I don't know that there is an issue that you can really say, the business community doesn't have, some interest in. Clearly there's core issues we care about, light regulation, good tax policy, all of those things. But I think that there's always some thread with almost every policy that can affect you and how you run your business on a day-to-day basis, from, requirements for how you, stripe your parking lot, for, waste removal, for emissions. I mean, there's really no limit to the ways in which government and laws touch businesses, local, state, and federal.
I hear a lot of times, well, we know Cox is down there and these other companies are down there, so we don't need to worry about it. What about that?
Clarify question for me.
Meaning that, there's already people down there talking to lawmakers. Why do I need to get involved?
Right.
Why does it matter if other businesses get involved with what's happening down there?
Well, companies like mine, we have people that we pay to go down to the legislature. This is their job, to lobby, to influence on behalf of the company. And so, to a lawmaker, that's our job, right? We go down there and we try to influence on behalf of the company. But for a person running a small business who doesn't have a contract lobbyist, who can't afford to hire somebody to do this, hearing from them as a business owner, business operator, somebody making payroll, has incremental value. And I don't mean to diminish the value of a contract lobbyist and, a paid lobbyist to do that work. But when lawmakers hear from people who are trying to run their businesses, pay their employees, take care of their benefits and be successful, that voice of that business owner has exponential value.
I couldn't agree more. I think some of the most powerful voices of the Capitol are those of small and mid-sized businesses that are saying, hey, I'm trying to meet a payroll here. And if you do this, it's going to have an impact on our employees in your district.
Yeah.
And that's why we always encourage people to get involved in the process. So thank you for that. So let's then go to public affairs. Your second time around, we recruited her back. And there's a reason for that, because she was also head of research in the Senate, and I was just an analyst. So we had to go to the right person here. But tell us a little bit about the process, how public affairs works, and how do we engage at the legislature?
Yeah, so our public affairs process with the chamber has been in existence for a long time, and it's been vetted and tested, and it is a very good model. And Todd, the way that we arrive at our guiding principles is as a process of bringing together issue committees. So we have this incredible wealth of talent and knowledge and expertise in the members that serve on the public affairs committee, and we bring in other board members who are interested, subject matter experts, and in these issue committees, kind of look at all these policy issues to say, okay, what do we want the chamber's agenda to look like? We've got, Mike Huckins on your team who is down at the Capitol, and he's got to have some kind of a roadmap to say, this is where the chamber's at on these issues, so I can go and either advocate for or try to defeat or modify bad legislation. So this process that happens typically, the summer and fall prior to legislative session is the issue committees meet. We look at our guiding principles, what needs to be updated, what needs to be changed. So it's this iterative process that every year we refresh it, make sure we've got the chamber's priority issues documented there. We share that with legislators once the board's adopted it. And then that is really kind of our moment of truth. That's what we utilize to get through the legislative session. Once the committee is done with that work, we meet regularly during the legislative session. And so a vast majority of the issues are very clearly falling one way or the other in our guiding principles. We will support that bill because it clearly aligns with our principles. We'll oppose that one because it's clearly in opposition. But then there's all the kind of gray stuff that comes in between. So during the session, we have our biweekly meetings. We bring some of these bills to the committee. We have a robust discussion. We might bring in the proponents and have a conversation around it, but we'll give direction to Mike Huckins and his team on how to lobby the issue with the board's knowledge and counsel as well. So, like I said, that process has been around for a long time. It works very well. It's very consistent. And I would say it's respected in the legislature too. I think they understand that when the chamber stands up and testifies on an issue, it's with thought, input, diverse views from the members, and with a sound guiding principle policy to stand behind.
I agree. I mean, it's certainly, there's no wild, wild west where Mike's just making up what position the chamber is going to be in. There's a very iterative process.
Right.
And I think it's also interesting that a small business can have the same voice.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's really cool. And that's where I think there's a real opportunity for small mid-sized business owners to be a part of a process and have their voice heard in terms of the process.
Absolutely. I think it's the great, moderator in terms of the voice of the business community, because you're exactly right, Todd. It is the opportunity for a larger company like a Cox or others to stand with their brethren behind the name of the chamber, but that includes every chamber member. And so it's a value that if those businesses had to go and find that and pay for it on their own, it's very expensive. And it's not something that business owners want to have to spend a lot of their time doing, even though, as we discussed earlier, hearing directly from them is important. But the chamber, this is what the chamber does. And so it's just an incredible part of the value proposition.
Absolutely. Well, I want to address, obviously, we've had a lot of talk out there about elections. And we had the Georgia runoff recently, and that election was called very quickly. Our elections are a little bit different. You want to talk about what maybe draws out the counting period here in Arizona so much?
Yeah, and I think like everything that happens, once there is national media interest and there's high political interest in what we do in our processes, everybody's an expert, right? And I think this is really no different. And that's not to say that every election is run flawlessly and doesn't have its issues. Every election does, and if you talk to people who run elections all across this country, they're never done perfectly and flawlessly. But that said, I think our process, which has been established by the legislature, I might add. Right. So if you don't like the way it's being run, there are certainly ways that it can be changed. But the process of allowing people to drop off their mail-in ballots on election day that requires a signature validation process, and that takes time. And we had so many more people do that this year than ever before. That certainly drew out and added to the time it took for those votes to be counted. And, if you are a candidate, you want the results now. I get it. I totally get that. But you also want to make sure that the electorate's votes are counted and counted properly. So I think for the elections folks and the county workers that run these elections, they're kind of in a no-win situation. Yes. They want them counted fast, but the process is not designed to be counted fast, and they want them to be accurate. And there's a high level of scrutiny on the accuracy. I don't know that there's anything that's more scrutinized than our elections, complete with video cameras and observers and the whole 9 yards. So I can't honestly say 20 years ago I would have ever thought this would be the top media issue and the top issue for the state of Arizona during the elections is the election process itself. Not necessarily the outcome, but the process.
Yeah. Right. Are there some things we can do, for instance, around early ballots, bringing in your early ballot that might speed up the process next time?
Yeah, no, I think one of the ideas on the table, I'm not sure it speeds up the process because it takes more time at the polling place, but allowing people who come in with their mail-in ballot where they've signed their envelope, but they would rather just run it through the machine. Right. There's got to be a process to validate that voter's identification at that point to make sure there's not double counting of ballots. So that will take more time at the polling place, which means maybe longer lines. Maybe we need more polling locations. Right. But that is certainly one of the ideas that's been floated around to address the problem with having so many of those mail-in ballots being dropped off on election day. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of conversation down at the legislature this year about it, and a lot of ideas from people that maybe sit on either side of the aisle politically, or maybe just people that have a passion for making sure the voters' voice is heard. We'll see.
Absolutely. But what I'm hearing from you is it's not necessarily an integrity issue. It's more it's the opposite side of the spectrum, that we want to make sure we cross every T and dot every I, so that it does take longer.
Yeah. I can't imagine the pressure that Maricopa County was under, that, they were being scrutinized. They had to make sure they got it right. They had to make sure everybody's vote was counted. And yet, with the way the law is written, there's a process, and they have to follow that process as well. And sometimes those issues are at odds with each other in terms of the expectation of the public, the expectation of the candidates, and the expectation of the media. Let's not forget them in all of this.
Absolutely. They were happy to talk about it.
Yes. And they wanted the results, and they wanted to know when the next data dump was going to be. And
Thank God for the data guru.
Yep.
So I want to shift gears a little bit, because we both came up sort of in the process a while ago. Things have changed a lot. What would you tell somebody that maybe is thinking about, I'd love to maybe get into public affairs? Is this something you'd recommend still today?
Absolutely. I think that from the standpoint of just being curious about how your government is run, and being curious about how laws are made, and being curious about the type of people that, put their lives on hold to go down to the legislature for 6-7 months of the year. And, for all of the I think the negative perceptions and the criticisms people have of people who are in elected office, it is a sacrifice. And so I think for people to learn about it and understand how it works, especially if you're running a business, if you don't have some intellectual curiosity about why this matters, you may find yourself on the wrong end of a policy someday, and you're going to say, "Wait a minute, what happened? What do you mean that law changed? I didn't know anything about it." To the point of a potential career path, I think you and I can certainly say it's been very good to us in our career path. I can tell people, and I mean this with all sincerity, I learned something new every day 100%. In my job, whether it was inside the legislature or outside the legislature. What an incredible gift and opportunity to get to be engaged with people who are making the decisions and influencing the decisions that decide what our state looks like and how it runs.
No, I agree. So point well taken. And I think to your point about these players, I mean, we see these keyboard warriors throwing bombs at people they've never met. And when you get down there and actually meet them in person, it's a different deal. Yeah. And it's a little bit different.
It is.
And I think you learn a lot about people. And it has been, I think, a really interesting career path. No 2 days are the same.
Yep. That is absolutely true.
Well, before we wrap up, I'd like to do a quick lightning round.
Okay.
And since we are policy geeks here, tell me, who is your political role model? And you can do two if you'd like.
I'm a big fan of Condoleezza Rice. I always have been. Steady, brilliant, respected, calm. She's my quintessential hero.
She's amazing.
Yep.
Okay, excellent choice. And then you talked about jobs, but what was your first job?
Oh, let's see. If you don't count the paper route,
Correct.
right?
Well,
that,
you
that we
could.
all had, sure. It would be my job working for the natural gas company I shared with you. That was my college job. I will say it's interesting that my career path led me to a company that works in the infrastructure business. Now, delivering something different, not natural gas, but broadband. But yeah.
And besides learning how to drive the bucket truck, which is invaluable, what did you learn from that first job?
I think I learned to appreciate my college education. If I'm being perfectly honest. Hard work and people that keep our country running.
Absolutely.
Because they're doing the jobs that need to be done to keep the gas on, to keep the roads built, to keep things moving in our economy. Profound respect for what it takes physically. And, all of that, it really made me appreciate that role, but it also made me appreciate my college education.
Well, 100%. I think you appreciated, you knew the difference from that experience. I think for us in COVID, there was somebody keeping the lights on. That was not at home. Mm-hmm. Somebody was at Cox out in the field, making sure we had the internet to attend our Zoom meetings and no unimportant jobs.
Absolutely.
Out there.
Absolutely.
It's so true.
Yeah. And, on that point during COVID, we had, our employees that showed up and connected and fixed people's internet every day, went to people's homes, stood outside their homes and figured it out. To me, all of those people, not just in our industry and our business, but they're the true heroes.
I 100% agree. Yeah. And it's true. You heard stories about people from Cox having to connect people through a window.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Right. And they were
using cell phones to explain to them how to, do their self-install.
Make sure kids could go to school.
Yeah.
So, okay. And now we know you love your job, but dream job.
Oh, wow. I think I would love to be a travel writer. I love to travel. I love to write. And if somebody would pay me to do both, oh yeah, for sure.
Well, if you need a travel writer, you know where to go. Well, Susan, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you for spending time with us today, but also for your leadership at the Chamber. Your job is probably one of the hardest volunteer jobs we've got, and you're back again. So we thank you for that, and certainly thank you for your leadership at a community-wide level.
Thank you. Honored and appreciate your trust in me. Thank you, Todd.
All right. Take care.